Seattle, Washington. Thanks to Antonella Recchia invited me here to speak to you tonight about Italians in the Pacific Northwest. This is my book. It's published last September. And tonight at the end, I'm picking my favorite number, and whoever gets closest to my favorite number gets this book. I also donated one to the library. So I'm happy to pass it around just so people can have a look while I'm chatting. I don't know why this is up here, but we'll get started.
You look nicer in person.
Thank you. This is AI generated, by the way. Just to show you how close I can get. I mean, it kind of looks, you know, a little bit Italian. So anyway, I thought I'd just show you a little bit of that.
AI generated? What does that mean? You asked it to make your picture?
Yes,
Of Italian immigrants
yes.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
in 1900 or so, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, why isn't my little? No, I just got this till I come on. No? So here we go. Okay, a little bit about myself. I am an author and a community historian. The book that I'm passing around is The Italians of the Northwest, my debut nonfiction book. When I attended a historical fiction conference in Oxford, England, and I met a woman, and she suggested that I pitch this publisher. I don't know, you probably recognize, you've probably seen books similar to this, right, with a sepia tone, called Arcadia Publishing. They were based out of New York, now they're in South Carolina. She asked me to, you know, she said, take a chance, pitch them. I pitched them in 6 hours, they responded. If you know anything about New York publishing or publishing in general, nobody responds in 6 hours. And it's because they had about 58, 59 books about Italian Americans, all of them east of the Mississippi, as you can imagine. They were shocked to know that there was Italian Americans in the Pacific Northwest. They also have, I think, a couple books about Italians in California and one in New Orleans. So anyway, there's that book. Historical fiction, this is my debut historical fiction book, Slain Over Simone, set in Grado. Grado is a spot town my family has been going to for decades. And then I continue the story from the book, stories from the book, but I also include British Columbia, which is where I grew up too, on a Substack. It's a free Substack, so don't worry about that. And I have a couple of anthologies, and then there's my book that's coming holiday 2024. So my family is from San Daniele del Friuli. You can see where I put the little heart right there. Here's Venice, here's us up there. We're famous for these three things: prosciutto, pantofoli, or in our dialect, pantuffe, and Montasio cheese. So Montasio, Mount, Asio cheese. The monks have been making this cheese since the 1400s. When my family moved across Canada from Toronto to Vancouver, my father had this come on the rail about every 6 months, and I grew pretty attached to it. These shoes, you might recognize them when they're black. A lot of the gondoliers wear them. So our area makes them. And of course the prosciutto, we have an ongoing rivalry with Parma. Of course, I'm prejudiced. I think ours is better than theirs. But anyway, that's a little bit about San Daniele and where we come from. This is my grandfather, my paternal grandfather. He took a ship, like many did, and he sailed from Genoa. He was going to come to New York for whatever reason, we don't know now. He stopped in Halifax, and he said he wanted to be a permanent resident, even though he had a wife and my aunt, who is, I think he was in Canada for like 9 years. So he met her for the first time at 9 years old, but for whatever reason, you know, there's all the documentation from the ship's manifest. He said that, you know, he wanted to stay in Toronto, but he was headed for New York. So I could have been American, but I'm actually a dual Italian-Canadian citizen. I'm married to an American. Sits right over there. My husband, Jason. Say hello, please.
Hello.
Okay, this is my presentation. This is the timeline we're following. My presentation starts in about 1880. We're starting 1791 and goes to post-1950 just a little bit. That's what's covered in the book. That's what I'm covering tonight. There's a lot of words on here, but you just kind of see the progression, and basically, you know, each step as the Italian immigrants that came to the Pacific Northwest went through. Thank you. So this is the first Italian in our area. However, he never set foot in the Pacific Northwest. He is credited for being the first, and the reason he didn't set foot in the Pacific Northwest is because he was sailing for Queen Isabella, right, the Spanish crown. And she, as many royals and other groups of people, wanted to get to the Northwest Passage. And so he was under the gun to get up there, and so he never made landfall. But he was the first one in terms of Yes, he sailed for the Spanish crown, and sometimes he went instead of Alessandro Malaspina, sometimes he went by Alejandro, the Spanish version. This little area right here is called the Malaspina Strait. There's also a glacier up in Alaska named for him. So even though he never had landfall, he's very much credited for being the first Italian in the area. So we're happy to have his name in the area. And there are Malaspinas, you'll see a little bit about that in my book, in the Seattle area, but they claim no heritage to him. If you've ever done any work with searching your Italian surname, you know, typically the surnames sort of settle in one area of Italy or one or two areas. And the area they come from is the same area that the Malaspinas in Seattle come from, yet they claim no heritage. I don't know, it's kind of strange. I don't think they've done enough research. Okay, so then after Malaspina were the Jesuits, what the indigenous people in the Pacific Northwest call the Black Robes. So Father Calti, Father Mangarini, most of these spent very little time in the Pacific Northwest, but we do credit them because they did make an appearance in the area. Mostly they were in California, but Father Ravalli and Father Cataldo are the main Jesuits that built missions and were very well respected amongst the indigenous peoples in the Pacific Northwest. Father Cataldo actually started the, now it's escaping me, the university in Spokane.
Gonzaga.
Gonzaga, thank you. Yeah, of course you would know. Yeah, you're from Seattle. So after the Jesuits came additional priests who started the churches in the area, and these are the three that are most well known, that are Italian, of Italian descent. Father Balestra, St. Michael's was the first Italian church. It's also an Italian national church in Portland, and his name is all over that church. He was the pastor, I think, for about 40 some odd years. Very, very well respected. And then St. Philip Neri, so once the Italians left downtown Portland and they moved across the river, across the Willamette River, and they started another, it's sort of Italian colony over there, they built St. Philip Neri. But they did not get a pastor until, an Italian pastor until 1996, even though the church started in 1960. So a long time before they had somebody from Italian descent. And then Father Caramello, Mount Virgin, he also worked very closely with Mother Cabrini, which I'm sure you all know that name. But Father Caramello was also a longtime priest, I think 42 years in Seattle, very similar to Father Balestra in Portland. So they established the churches in the area. But I want to take us back to the Italian Americans arriving. Of course, you all know the statue of Lady Liberty. And so I imagine them, you know, here they are landing, they see her. They may not realize, and I know there's some controversy about this, that the French sculptor was actually inspired by a Florentine sculptor. And this is his statue. You can see how very similar the drape of the clothing, well, she holds a broken chain, and here she is stepping on the chain down here. Very similar. There is debate about it, but I thought I'd include it because I like to think that, you know, they're seeing her and not really realizing that there's an Italian connection. Okay, so the Great Wave, you know, they come through Ellis Island, and you may have heard us speaking earlier, my husband Antonello and I, that this is my 11th or 12th, I can't remember, trip to New York City, and only 2 years ago when we came, I had the guts to go to Ellis Island. Even though, as you saw, my grandfather was supposed to come through here, and he didn't. For whatever reason, he stopped in Canada. But it's these kind of pictures I get pretty emotional about, but has everybody gone to Ellis Island here? All gone to Ellis Island? Yeah. It's pretty emotional. I mean, I found that we were there all day, saw all sorts of things, but just seeing these pictures, and I know they're not all Italians. I know there's lots of immigrants that came through, but it's pretty amazing. I think of my own parents who came. My father came to Canada in 1950. My mother followed in 1960. And to Canada, and I think about my mother, she'd never left her little town of San Daniel del Friuli. She'd never even been to Venice, which is less than an hour away. And she comes, she didn't know the language, she barely knew my father. They met and married in a week. Didn't know the language, didn't have any money. And I said, you had to cross the ocean. First of all, she had to go to Genova, on the other side of northern Italy, take the boat, then take the train 3 days to get to close to Toronto, where we settled. And I said, what if he wasn't there? What would you have done? Like, how much money did he give you? She said, about $40. $40 in 1960. Like, what would she have done? She didn't know how to use a phone. We never had phones until like 1975 in our town in Italy. So she's like, well, we wrote to each other. He was supposed to be there. I just can't imagine. So you can imagine these folks. Some of them traveled alone. Some of them traveled very young. Some traveled as families. Some had families waiting for them. Some didn't. I thought this was interesting. I found this at the Library of Congress. This is the first passport that the Library of Congress has registered to an Italian. Interesting that she and her son went to Winnemucca, Nevada. And at first when I found this, I thought, what the heck is in Winnemucca, Nevada in that time period? But it was the silver mines. So interesting that they managed to, this is out west, not Pacific Northwest, but okay, so they get off of Ellis Island, they come to Mulberry Street, and this is kind of what they see. They're told the streets are paved in gold. This is what they saw. And some wanted to leave, right? This was not the life they envisioned for themselves, and they were lured out west. This would have been a scene that some of the Italian immigrants who came to Seattle would have seen. This road no longer exists. Now there's a tunnel here. But this is what they would have seen. And it was only because of the railways that they were able to leave this area and come out west. Some of them went, to Oregon. Some of them stopped in Idaho. But this was, if you put yourself in their kind of mindset, in their shoes, this is what they would have seen getting off the train. If it wasn't for the train, they wouldn't have come. This is the area known as Garlic Gulch in Seattle, and they settled down in here. This is the Georgetown area. Interesting, I'm working on a project with some folks in Georgetown now. There was a potter's field. Does everybody know the potter's field? People who, were buried and didn't have a way to have a headstone or to really be buried in a proper way. So this was when they rerouted the Duwamish River, they had to move all these bodies that were buried here. And some of them were Italian, and we're trying to match up the bodies to maybe existing families, maybe not, but we're going through that project right now in the city of Seattle. Rainier Beach is also an area where Italian Americans settled, but it's mostly this area that was considered Little Italy. Not much Little Italy left. You probably know that too, right? Yeah. But we're going to get to West Seattle later in you'll be interested there's quite a connection to West Seattle in my presentation. Okay, so we're going to go through a few different Italians, characters I call them, in our area. This is Attilio Merlino. He founded Merlino Oil. You probably may have seen it in the grocery stores here, I don't know. There he is playing his mandolin. Very much a character. Often considered one of the first bankers in our area. So Italians didn't necessarily consider putting their money with the bank, but they would give it to him. He'd store it away. So he's not only a grocer, mandolin player, but also a banker. And we saw a little fun fact here. His daughter was Mario Batali's granddaughter. The first Italian consul in Seattle was a newspaperman, a radioman, a pharmacist, Nicola Paolella. He was the first president of our Italian club. He ran the Italian radio hour, I think, for 20 years, something like that, yeah. And he was known as the dean of the Italian colony, which is why he got the title of Italian consul. As I heard many times in Little Italy here as well, that there were various groups of Italians, right? Some came from the north, some came from the south, some came from Sicily. Didn't always get along, families didn't want the intermarriage. Same thing happened in Seattle. It wasn't until this exposition in 1909, the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition 1909, that Nicola Paolella, that we just heard about, brought all the Italians together. And this is what did it for them. So there's a little example there's one of the logo for it. One of the bands that played, a very, very famous band, around the early 1900s, came all the way to play for the exhibition. So this is just a certificate for Angelo Merlino, who we saw earlier, for his olive oil. He won an award for that. In Portland, we have this gentleman as the first Italian, Samuel Arrigoni. He was the first businessman, as you saw. He started as a seaman running on a ship between Panama and San Francisco. He arrived in, that should say 1856, which is pretty early if you consider, in the Pacific Northwest. I think, if I recall correctly, the railroad started coming to our area fully completed in about 1950, so this is pretty early for him to come. Of course, he came by boat. In 1869, he sold his 300-room hotel. Now think about that. In 1869, he had a 300-room hotel. This is an immigrant who came with very little. I mean, he clearly made some money, being a seaman, but he wasn't like a captain or a merchant or anything like that. Then he moved to Astoria. Some of you might know about Astoria, based on John Astor, who started that town in Portland, near Portland. If you ever get a chance to see, it's a good place to go. So he moved his hotel there, very prominent citizen in that area. But then we find a little fun fact where his wife and his daughter moved back to Portland and opened a small inn, so not like the big hotel that he used to have, but a small inn. But there's no information about what happened to him, and there's not even a death certificate. So could be his death, it might not have been. There are rumors that the two of them didn't get along, so I don't know. She was in the hotel business with him, so we don't know what happened to him, but he certainly didn't come with her. Another first Italian in Portland, the Aradas. You can see here they have their liquor distribution center. Francesco Arada came over at 15 years old. He came into Toronto. Just 2 years later, he's in Portland and he established his liquor distribution company. So very quickly, making a name for himself and growing a business. When he landed in Portland, only about 1,000 Italians there, and within 10 years, it quintupled. This is a typical area in Portland where the immigrants live. The Jews and the Italians actually came to Portland around the same time, 1900, 1905, and they certainly helped each other out. But these houses were here, and as you can see, totally devastated when the interstate came through and devastated Little Italy in Portland. And this happened a lot of towns. Happened in Seattle, it happened in Spokane. So a lot of our Little Italies in the Pacific Northwest just decimated. And some of them said it was just to get rid of some of these houses. They were moving, into different areas with a little bit more affluence. So a lot of people complained to the city that some of these early towns, early houses, were just a blight on the city. And they can see it. Okay, so now we have the Italians, learned about the first Italians in the Pacific Northwest. And then this is some of the, both in newspapers. This is from the Northwest Catholic News. This is from an Iowa paper. Okay, that's not Pacific Northwest, but you'll see throughout my presentation that there's a juxtaposition. I like to show, here's Italians as citizens. Usually it's safe to say such a classification, it's like, why are Italians classified as undesirable citizens? And then here's the response, positive for Italian immigrants. This one's not quite so much. A lot of people don't even believe there used to be signs, Italians not wanted, or help wanted, no Italians. I know there was help wanted, no Irish, help wanted, no Polish, but there was a lot of help wanted, no Italians. Even on the West Coast, people don't realize that. Here's some Italians, a part of the parade on Labor Day in 1903 in Seattle. So again, the juxtaposition, the Italians came because the country needed workers, right? And then they have to deal with this anti-Italian sentiment. Very unfortunate. But they experience it even out west. Here's some of the wanted ads. The one on the bottom is from Tacoma in 1922. And you can see it doesn't say no Italians, but by omission, right? Only Americans, Scandinavians, Irish, English, or Germans need apply. Unfortunately, they were discriminated, and this is the kind of thing that they were subjected to. So in the early years in the Pacific Northwest, as I mentioned, that railroads were very prominent in our area. It's what brought a lot of the immigrants out, especially Italians. The Italians and the Chinese, especially in Idaho, worked together to build the railroads. This picture is very important. It's been debated by anthropologists against each other, and finally certain ones of them won. Initially, these domed rock ovens were attributed to the Chinese. Chinese don't bake bread. At least they didn't when they were working on the railroad. The Italians did. So now this has been designated a heritage area for Italian Americans who came out to work on the railway. So as you can see, Italians, as many immigrants did, they took the hardest jobs, and railroads was one of the big ones that Italians were involved in. Also, clay and brick manufacturing, mining. This is the Denny Clay and Brick Manufacturer. This is in a suburb of Seattle. The town, Taylor, no longer exists, but it was the Denny Clay and Brick Manufacturing. At the time, they were the largest clay and brick manufacturer in the United States. So just south of Seattle. And of course, full of Italians working for very little pay. This area here is what's called Ladd's Addition in Portland. So when you saw the houses I showed earlier, when I-5 and the Interstate 5 came through, they moved across the Willamette River and they moved into this area. This is all farmland. The Italians and the Japanese lived side by side. They had their farms here. And then they started building, they had truck farms, and they started building sort of places where people could go, markets. The Sheraton Fruit Company, while it's not an Italian name, there are Italians behind it to this day. 4 generations of Italian still there. They're on Produce Row. So a lot of farmers that used to sell their produce in trucks, just drive around the city selling their produce, started actually having their own buildings. And this is a farm run by Italians, a very large farm in Spokane. So coming out of the farms or coming out of hard labor, some Italian Americans, or some, at that point, in some cases, still just Italians, have now become citizens, took their produce to markets. This is a very famous market in Seattle, the Pike Place Market. Some of you might know it. There's that family, the Gonzalez family, are still there from 1900. It's again, I think four generation. The Scarpelli brothers, as a number of other Italians, had macaroni factories. I gave a talk in Vancouver, Washington last year. There was actually a Scarpelli brother, 3rd generation, in the audience, and he wanted me to send him this because this is just information they didn't have about their family. So it's just, you never know who you meet in your presentations. The Star Grocery Company, this is in Pocatello, Idaho. The company car, 1930. The Seattle French Bakery, the Philip Suja, was one of the partners in Seattle French Bakery. Now, he was a partner with 2 other Italians. They called it the French Bakery because they got more business that way. Same thing, they had Portland French Bakery. Same thing, Italians behind that, they called it the French Bakery. Very sad, never changed it until they were bought by Gay's, G-A-I, I don't know if any of you know that bread company. Both the Sujas and the Portland French Bakery family sold to Gay's, big, huge bakery. So, in terms of mutual aid, Italians came together and formed societies, benevolent societies, where they helped one another out. This is the time before workers' compensation. They would help each other out if, let's say, again, we saw how many Italians were involved in mining, very difficult work, paving. If there's an accident, what would they do? They'd leave a family who would take care of them. And so these mutual aid societies were formed as men made more money, and they put money to these societies, and certain members of the Italian community could draw on that and get help. That's one of them in Seattle. So this is a different type of mutual aid company. This is where farmers came together. This is in Portland, the Italian Gardeners and Ranchers Association. Here's the original building once they moved out of downtown Portland and across the river. They built this huge building. In this room right here, during the 20s and 30s, Italian women learned to smoke. They had classes. Philip Morris, I don't know if you know, those were the days, you'd see ads in magazines where doctors would recommend a certain cigarette brand. Well, Italian women learned to smoke in this very room right here. Over here was the pool hall, and this little token, sometimes when I write, I like to have little tokens with me on my writing desk, and this is one I bought for $5 off of eBay. And this correlates to the billiard room here in the Italian Ranchers and Gardeners Association. So I just have that as a little token. And here's the building today. You can see it's repurposed. It's not a Gardeners and Ranchers Association building, but there they are in the beginning of when this building was started. Just, they're doing business there. So it's just nice to see the old and the new, and a little token kind of a thing. Some of the things the Italians did. building wasn't just about produce. Mutual aid also started some groups with women. This one is the first one. The Society, the Sister Society, Italian Independence Society, the very first one, you can see number 1, started in Seattle. We have some of the granddaughters from the women who started that organization still in our Italian club today. These ladies are in Portland, the Pompeii Society. When I spoke in Portland, a lot of the women remember the society, but don't know what happened to it. So they were happy to see that I found these pictures. I dug through the parish archives, the Archdiocese archives in Portland, and I managed to find this picture. They look very serious, these ladies. So besides anti-Italian sentiment, Italian Americans and Italians were subject to this kind of war propaganda. I'm sure you've seen this one. This is a very famous one. This is a poster from our federal government, right, during the war. Some of the things that Italians would be subject to if they could read. If they could read, they kind of understand what that was about, but still, again, juxtaposition. So here's the notice to aliens when they had to register, whether you were German, Italian, or Japanese. But then here's a picture of an Italian family sending their sons off to war. So on the one hand, you had to register, you were considered an enemy, but a lot of men volunteered. Again, more juxtaposition. Here's, we talked earlier about the Merlino family, and you can see Phyllis Merlino here. She's in support of Mussolini, and she's basically saying she's representing the Italian colony. They're all supporting Mussolini. On the other hand, over here is Dr. Mariepoli. There's a great PBS documentary about her. She's half Irish, half Italian. First female doctor, first Italian female doctor in the Portland area. She was very controversial, but the PBS did a great documentary about her. Also the first sort of publicly out there lesbian in the Portland area. She had a partner, the two of them adopted a little girl. I did follow up with the folks who created the documentary and try to find out what happened to that little girl. Nobody knows, but because I brought it up, they're like, yeah, we didn't think about that. So maybe we'll see some information about her. But she was very prominent. She mostly helped women, immigrant women, their children. She also volunteered her services for free when we had the earthquake in San Francisco in 1905. She was awarded a medal by Roosevelt, but she was also arrested many times. She attended a number of rallies for the Wobblies. I don't know if you know the Wobblies, the International Workers of the World. Very much a supporter of the suffragist movement. So here she is volunteering her time. She gets a medal from Roosevelt, and at the same time, she's being persecuted and arrested. But fascinating woman. More juxtaposition. So some of you saw some of the social media that went out before my talk. I had a little video about the Loprinzi family. There's 10 of them. There were acrobats or gymnasts. There were weightlifters. 4 of them volunteered for the Navy. This is 4 of them in San Diego. So here they are, they're serving. And then here's a picture in Vancouver, Fort Vancouver, Washington, where these are Italians, not Italian Americans, but Italians who were captured in North Africa, brought all the way over to the west coast of the United States. They wear a uniform, they wear a patch that says Italy. So they might have been, they had the separate barracks from the American soldiers. They did whatever the American military asked them to do. It could be make food, it could be dig ditches, it could be play music. So these are called Italian Service Units, or ISUs. So these are actual prisoners. A lot of them, especially Second World War, it wasn't long before Italy capitulated and moved to the Allied side. That's when, if you were an officer of the Italian armed forces, you could be checked out. So Italian families would come, pick you up from the base, you'd come and go to mass with them, you could have dinner with them, and you were brought back that night, but only officers. So they weren't necessarily, yes, they were registered as enemy aliens and all that kind of stuff, and they were prisoners of war, but later in the war, they were allowed to leave the base and be checked out, and some of them even married Americans and stayed here. There's, anyway, a little bit of that juxtaposition. So this is the public proclamation about the enemy aliens. This comes from the Presidio in San Francisco. This is the main headquarters for all of the armed forces on the West Coast. So they also regulated the prisoners of war. There's the information about them. What you didn't see is this picture comes from the video that I couldn't play. So the Comolini, so yes, he was a bootlegger and such, but he had one of the largest soup kitchens in Spokane. So yes, he was a bootlegger, but he helped out mostly Italian men, unfortunately, who used to be railroad workers, were served by him in his soup kitchen. So Italians also participated in non-military service. This gentleman here, Dominic Carpini, his mentor, his idol, some of you might know, is Joseph Petrosino. I don't know if you know that the square that's here, the first Italian that served in the police here in New York City. So this gentleman was very much looked up to Petrosino, and that's why he joined the Renton police force. Renton is a suburb of Seattle. There's Dr. Mariecki here in her clinic. And then this is World War I now, the Italian Red Cross. Not a great picture, I'm sorry, that's the best one we have. And I thought it just, like such a show of force of Italian women parading in Portland. There's no other picture like it, so I do include it. Here are some interesting facts around produce. As you heard me say, a lot of Italians were involved as farmers. And all, by the way, all of the, almost all of the pictures, I think about 95% of the pictures I'm showing tonight are not in the book. So what's here is not in the book so that you get a mix of things. So broccoli was first planted over here in Portland by an Italian. Walla Walla Sweets. This is a town in southeastern Washington. It's where my husband went to college, and so the Walla Walla Sweets, again, were planted by Italians. And then this Pellegrini bean, or called the monachine, or little nuns. Just 2 years ago, unless you knew the Pellegrini family, you couldn't grow that bean. Now somebody has actually commercialized it, and now you can, it has a very nutty taste. If you ever see it, I suggest you plant it, or know someone to plant it for you. It's a lovely little bean. Angelo Pellegrini, which you'll learn about later, is named after him. He created that bean. Here he is. These are his books. They're mostly out of print, and if you get them, they're very expensive. But these two are really about the immigrant experience. He's written many, many other books. He was a professor of English at the University of Washington, Angelo Pellegrini, from the Bean. Other significant contributions was Tony and Attilio Mineo. So there they are over there, and they created the music for the Seattle Fair in 1962 when Elvis came. I bought the record. It's a lovely little tune. I think you can also hear it on YouTube if you'd like, but I actually bought the record. This gentleman was an immigrant from 1960, so much later. I know it's a bad photo, but it's from a newspaper, and the newspaper wasn't able to even find it for me so I can buy it, but here he is with his wooden altar. The picture, the lost picture, Salvador Mundi, one of the art galleries in Seattle, asked this gentleman, who is a sculptor, he was a painter, a woodworker, to make this altar for this painting when it was exhibited in Seattle. Nobody knows what happened to it. Lots and lots of Italians have a lot of his woodwork, but no one knows, not even the gallery that paid for him to make it, knows what happened to this beautiful triptych, they call it. All right, some more characters in the Pacific Northwest. Here's 5 of the Nacarado brothers, very famous family in Idaho. When they came in the late 1890s, each year they bought land and each brother built a home. So there's 6 of them all together. There's one of them that's missing. One of them was involved, the one that's missing was involved in robbing a stagecoach. There's a little fun fact. I mentioned that in Portland, the Italians and the Jewish people came together, immigrated together, and some of them even went into business together and helped one another out. So on one hand, one side of the store there was sort of food and goods for Jewish people, on the other side for Italians. This gentleman you might not have heard of, kind of a unique character in Spokane, but very, very talented. His artwork is all over Spokane. He was self-taught, but definitely a character. He unfortunately committed suicide about 20 years into his career. So not a lot of his work still exists, but very important person in Spokane. At one point, Seattle had over 200 shoe stores in our area, and this gentleman, Tony LaSalle, was very well known. He would sit outside, read his newspaper until a customer came in oftentimes. Very much a character in the neighborhood. You might not recognize the name, Virgil Facio, but he was in charge, he was the publisher of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, which is no longer, for many, many years, but very important guy. I know his granddaughter. And then we have Mike the barber, who was a barber for over 60 years. There he is cutting his wife's hair. Everybody went to Mike the barber. He had this tiny little shop, one chair. He had nobody else helping him, and he worked until his 70s. Mother Cabrini, I don't know if any of you saw the movie that recently came out. It was a fantastic movie. Unfortunately, it didn't cover anything about Mother Cabrini's work in the Pacific Northwest. Lots of schools, orphanages, hospitals that Mother Cabrini started in Portland, and she even helped working with the prisoners. Imagine that, her and her nuns working with prisoners at that, way back when in the early 1900s. That was amazing. But unfortunately, the movie didn't cover any of that. Okay, this is just a fun picture because I covered the black robes earlier. Also, women wore black robes. Here's some nuns on vacation, and the Italian one is right there. You can't really see her, but I thought that was a fabulous picture. Whoever caught that picture is the right time, right spot. This is our Italian Cultural Center. This was the original one. Unfortunately, it had a fire and burnt down in the 60s. Only 3 years ago did they finally buy a building, and they're renovating it now, so it's only a few years old. It's where I had the launch for my book. This is our West Seattle connection. This lady over here is from West Seattle. This is the only Italian villa type of house on the Pacific Northwest. It was slated to be demolished. The woman who lived in this house, she was the youngest of 6 children. Her name was Sister Cabrini. When she was very young, her mother became very ill, and she went to Cabrini Hospital. And she said, she prayed to Mother Cabrini, who's already dead at that point, "If you save my mother, I will take your name." Mother Cabrini saved her mom. She became a nun, and she took the name Sister Cabrini. She's retired now. I met her 3 years ago. This was her house. Her father built it over 14 years, no blueprint, almost identical to the house he grew up in northern Italy. So this house is very, very special. The family no longer owns it. But when I met Sister Cabrini, former Sister Cabrini, she's retired now, she asked me if I'd write a letter to the city council. I did. My letter, in addition, also with other letters, people who wrote in, saved the house for now. The mass transit was supposed to come right through this area. This is the first time the Preservation Board of the City of Seattle considered not only the exterior, which is all they normally ever consider when saving a house, but also the interior, because there's terrazzo floors. And in the kitchen, there's a compass done in terrazzo, and that was a big factor in the Preservation Board saying, all right, for now, we're gonna save this house. So that's a nice little, here you preserve a lot of buildings on the West Coast. Not so much. This is pretty special for us to have this house, the Settled-In house. That's the end of my presentation. I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about what's next for me. I'm book 2 into a 9-book series. The first 2 are not published yet, but involves Lorenzo de Ponte's granddaughter. It involves Father Balester. This is the St. Michael the Archangel Parish in Portland. And it involves the Loprinzi family, which is the strongest family in America, maybe the world. They said so at the time, both American and the world. So all these characters are in a historical mystery series that I set in Portland in the interwar period. As you know, Lorenzo Ponte was in New York. He never made it out west. In my book, because it's fiction, he did. I've been approached by the Seattle Perugia Sister City Association to turn my book into a documentary short, a feature documentary, and a traveling exhibit. All of that takes a whole lot of money and a whole lot of time, so we're starting with this one first. We had hoped to get into the Seattle International Film Festival at the end of this year, in November. That's not happening, not yet, but we're working on it. So that's that's a continuation of this book. Like I said, also my Substack. And there you can sign up if you like in my newsletter. And that's my presentation for all of you.